On November 5, 1956, the final phase of British, French, and Israeli collusion begins as paratroopers swoop down over the Suez Canal. Fierce street fighting follows, but the political battle behind the scenes is equally intense, and now the Soviet Union enters the picture. It might all be over for the empires of Britain and France. Welcome to a TimeGhost chronological documentary series on the Suez Crisis. I'm Indy Neidell. Last time, we saw Egypt gripped by nationalist fever in the face of continued Israeli victories. The UN repeated its call for a ceasefire and approved the establishment of a peacekeeping force. But even in the face of mounting diplomatic pressure and a looming economic crisis, Britain and France decided to go ahead with Phase 3 of Operation Musketeer Revise, the actual invasion. In fact, they even accelerated things with new power drops planned under the codename Operation Telescope. Before we get to that though, let's look at the final stage of Israel's Operation Kadesh. As darkness fell on November 4th, and after a grueling journey down the coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, an IDF infantry brigade arrived at the outskirts of Sharm el-Sheikh, where Egyptian forces had dug in to defend the Straits of Tiran. The first assault begins west of the city just after midnight on the 5th. But after 4 hours of fighting and heavy casualties, the IDF is forced to withdraw. They make another attempt not long after dawn. Jeeps and half-tracks lead from the west, infantry battalions close from the east, and heavy artillery and air support pound Egyptian positions. By 9:30 a.m., the Egyptian forces have surrendered. Operation Kadesh is over. But the Anglo-French invasion is just getting started. Shortly after dawn, just over 1,000 British and French paratroopers initiate Operation Telescope and land around Port Said. Their objective is to secure as much Canal Zone territory as possible before hostilities can be brought to an end by international pressure. The British troops drop around 5 miles to the west, looking to capture the local airport. The French drop about a mile to the south, hoping to secure key bridges across the canal and the town's waterworks. Both forces soon achieve their objectives. French commanders decide to capitalize on their success and order more troops to drop in and take nearby Port Fouad, doing so by late afternoon. Meanwhile, the British make their way into Port Said. They face heavy resistance and fierce street fighting. They do manage to take the town's sewage works, but make little further progress and decide to establish defensive positions as dusk falls. The failure to take the entire town means that the amphibious landings of Phase 3 of Operation Musketeer Revise must now go ahead. The political battle at home, though, is growing ever hotter. As the paratroopers land, British Prime Minister Anthony Eden sends 2 cables to American President Dwight Eisenhower, attempting to justify his actions so far. He tells the president, "I am convinced that if we had allowed things to drift, everything would have gone from bad to worse. Nasser would have become a kind of Muslim Mussolini." Eden also says that he welcomes the creation of a UN peacekeeping force, but that as Israel and Egypt have not yet accepted any ceasefire, Britain and France had to act where no one else would. But Eisenhower is determined not to change his course. Work for an actual peacekeeping force will continue. But he's also committed to letting Britain and France feel the crunch from their actions just a little longer. He does allow transport ships to be readied to resolve their impending oil crisis caused by the shutting of the canal, but does not authorize them to set sail. Britain and France will have to cease hostilities if they want their oil problems solved. Meanwhile, Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs Lester Pearson and UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld are making further preparation for their peacekeeping force. We saw last time that the Canadian resolution, though, only gave Hammarskjöld 48 hours to submit a plan for a peacekeeping force. A nearly impossible task, but as battles rage in Port Said on November 5th, they managed to pass a new resolution in New York establishing a command structure for the international force under Canadian Major General E.L.M. Burns. Crucially, the resolution also stresses that none of this force can be drawn from the armies of the Permanent Security Council. Pearson and Hammarskjöld then continued to try and get the belligerent countries to accept the ceasefire and get the peacekeeping force going. But a much bigger player is about to get involved, one considerably less friendly to British and French interests than the US or Canada: the Soviet Union. So far, they have kept mainly to the sidelines, busy with the Hungarian uprising. But now that they have crushed it, the Politburo turns its full attention to Suez. Letters are sent out to the leaders of Britain, France, and Israel, signed by the formal head of state of the USSR, Premier Nikolai Bulganin. The letters to Britain and France are similar. I will read out part of the one to Britain to give you an idea. What kind of position would Britain be in if she had been attacked by stronger powers with all kinds of modern offensive weapons at their disposal? Yet, at the present time, such countries would not even need to send their naval and air forces to British shores, but could use other means, such as rockets. If rocket weapons were used against Britain and France, you would doubtless call that a barbarous act. The letter to Israel is even more ominous, closing with the message, "The Israeli government is criminally and irresponsibly jeopardizing the fate of peace, the fate of its people. It is sowing among the peoples of the East a hatred for the state of Israel, a hatred which will inevitably impact on Israel's future and will call into question Israel's very existence as a state." Bulganin also sends a letter to Eisenhower offering joint military intervention between the two superpowers, as only they have all contemporary forms of armaments, including atom and hydrogen weapons. All of these letters are also broadcast on state radio. So, the Soviets have now thrown themselves into the very center of things. It is just short of an actual ultimatum, but the message is crystal clear. Britain, France, and Israel face the prospect of nuclear attack if they continue their aggression. Bulganin's letter to Israel also suggests that the Soviet Union is even challenging the legitimacy of the Jewish state. How serious are these threats? Well, not very, as it turns out. The USSR lacks the capability for the nuclear strike it is threatening, and even the capability to carry out a more conventional military intervention. But the rest of the world does not know this, and it does lead to a lot of uncertainty. Eden scrambles to get an intelligence report from the Americans on the Soviets. In the meantime, a message goes out to Anglo-French headquarters to prepare for possible Soviet intervention. The French themselves are actually relatively unperturbed, simply assuming that America will stick to its NATO commitments if the Soviets do get involved. Eisenhower's response is quite considered. He and the rest of his administration are pretty sure it's a bluff. Still, they are worried about how this might destabilize a delicate situation. To retake the initiative, the White House releases an official statement. Neither Soviet nor any other military forces should now enter the Middle East area except under United Nations mandate. The introduction of new forces under these circumstances would violate the United Nations Charter, and it would be the duty of all United Nations members, including the United States, to oppose any such effort. All the while, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the international stage, the main Allied assault force has been preparing for their amphibious landings to complete the final phase of Operation Musketeer Revise. The assault begins at dawn, November 6th. It is preceded by aerial strafing runs and then a few salvos from naval destroyers, leaving significant areas of Port Said in flame or in ruins. After this, 2 battalions of British Royal Marine Commandos land on beachheads immediately north of downtown Port Said. Supported by tanks arriving shortly after, 1 battalion fights its way along the waterfront while the other pushes southward into the town to capture key infrastructure targets. Both take their first objectives with relative ease, but are slowed down on their way to successive ones by house-to-house fighting and sniper fire. We saw last time how Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser had called for a people's war against the aggressors, and this has by now made things tricky. Most Egyptian soldiers are dressed in civilian clothes, and some civilians have even taken up the arms freely distributed among them. This means that securing Port Said is not only dangerous, but also potentially politically explosive. High civilian casualties are only going to lead to lots more international condemnation. Nevertheless, the initial beachheads are secure, and further reinforcements are pouring in from the sea. The battle for Port Said also sees the first ever use of a helicopter airlift in a combat zone. It is somewhat chaotic and ill-planned, done in helicopters not really fit for the purpose, but it is a historic first, and also means more Royal Marines can directly enter the fray. The first waves of Marines have now linked up with French paratroopers to the south of the city. They are doing so, as I said, unaware of the political front collapsing back home. That morning, Eden is relieved to receive an American intelligence report that the Soviet nuclear threat is a bluff. But it does also seem clear which way the wind is blowing. At a morning cabinet meeting, he learns that the UN General Assembly has approved Hammarskjöld's preliminary plans for peacekeeping force, and that both Israel and Egypt have now accepted a ceasefire. Chancellor of the Exchequer Harold Macmillan delivers the final blow to the invasion and Eden's scheming. He says the Bank of England has lost 1/8 of its reserves in just these last few days, and that he has spent the entire night making phone calls to Washington to secure financial assistance. Each time he is told that the US Treasury will only provide help after Britain has accepted the ceasefire. There is actually some controversy about all this. Though it is bad, the state of British sterling is not as dire as Macmillan makes out. And there are 0 American government records indicating that his calls are actually made. Some will accuse Macmillan of lying, others of simply confusing his figures. It does not really matter. There is a run on the pound, and even if it hadn't been directly said straight out, it's pretty obvious that America won't bail Britain out. Plus, the twin oil and currency crises are fueling each other. The lack of oil is throwing financial markets into chaos, and there's little hard currency with which to buy more. So Macmillan's claims, true or false, may have influenced decision-making, but the writing on the wall is there for everyone to see anyway. By late morning, the cabinet agrees to accept the ceasefire. Before going public, Eden notifies French Premier Mollet in a phone call, telling him, "I don't think we can go on. The pressure on sterling is becoming unbearable. The English can take a lot of things, but I do not think they would be willing to accept the failure of sterling. The pressure is getting worse from day to day." Mollet is furious, especially as the French public still seems to be behind him. He demands a little more time, but Eden is defeated. Cannot go on any longer. Next, Eden notifies the American ambassador in London of his intention to accept the ceasefire. He wants Eisenhower informed immediately and says that he is available anytime should the president want to call him. Eisenhower soon rings and tells Eden how pleased he is with this development. He also insists that the ceasefire will be unconditional and that none of the Security Council members will be allowed to commit troops to the UN peacekeeping force. Eden reluctantly agrees. Eisenhower then tells Eden that he can call him anytime should he need assistance. Eden responds that if he survives the upcoming session of Parliament, he'll call in the morning. And so, the evening of November 6, 1956, British Prime Minister Anthony Eden makes his way to the House of Commons to announce that Britain will cease all hostilities at midnight. His gamble has not paid off, and he is a defeated man. From the start, the whole affair has been a colossal failure. His reckless gunboat diplomacy was perhaps suited to a different era when Imperial Britain could act anywhere, regardless of world opinion, global finances, or superpowers like the US and USSR. It is clear now that Britain is not the great power its leader thought it still was. But this is not the end of the crisis. Troops are still fighting around Port Said. Israel still occupies the Sinai. People are still dying by the hour, and the coming events will change the world. If you'd like to learn about a time when the world came actually even closer to nuclear Armageddon, then check out our Cuban Missile Crisis Day by Day series. You can start that right here. Our TimeGhost Army member of the week is Achut Bihani. It is the Army that funds all of our content, so for more of this magnificence, including all my different ties, join the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe and, ring that bell. Yeah. See you next time.